If you want to understand what actually drives desire at a deeper level, you have to begin in a place that most people completely overlook. Not appearance, not lines, not even confidence in the way it's commonly defined. You have to begin with emotional safety. Because before attraction can expand, the mind has to relax, and this is not just philosophy, it's biology. The human nervous system is constantly scanning for signals. Am I safe here, or do I need to protect myself? When a woman feels uncertain, judged, rushed, or subtly pressured, her system shifts into a protective state. In that state, desire doesn't grow. It shuts down. Not because she lacks interest, but because her mind is prioritizing safety over connection. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to increase attraction by adding more effort, more intensity, more pursuit. But desire doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to permission. Permission to relax, to exist without being evaluated. Emotional safety is that permission. Now, understand this clearly. Emotional safety is not about being overly agreeable or trying to please. It's not about losing your identity or becoming passive. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about being grounded enough in yourself that you don't need to control the interaction. You're not trying to force a response. You're not seeking validation in every moment. You're present, stable, and internally secure. And that stability is what the nervous system reads as safe. Because when someone is around you, they are not just hearing your words, they are feeling your state. If your energy is restless, if you are trying too hard, if there is an underlying urgency to be liked or accepted, it creates subtle tension. And tension signals risk. Even if nothing is explicitly wrong, the body senses that something is off. But when your presence is calm, when your attention is steady, when you are genuinely listening without trying to steer the outcome, something shifts. The interaction slows down, the pressure dissolves. And in that space, her mind begins to open instead of close. This is where desire has room to exist. Because desire is not something that is forced into existence. It emerges when resistance is removed. And resistance is almost always tied to a lack of safety. Think about it this way. When someone feels completely at ease around you, they are not filtering every word. They are not second-guessing themselves. They are not managing how they appear. They are simply present. And presence is the foundation of emotional connection. And emotional connection is what amplifies attraction beyond the surface. Now, here's where it becomes even more interesting. Emotional safety doesn't just allow connection, it deepens curiosity. When someone feels safe, they begin to lean in. They begin to wonder more about you, not because you are pushing for attention, but because they are not distracted by the need to protect themselves. Safety removes distraction, and what remains is attention. That attention, over time, transforms into interest, and that interest, when nurtured without pressure, evolves into desire. But this only happens when there is consistency. Emotional safety is not built in a single moment. It is built through repeated experiences of calm, respect, and authenticity. It's how you respond when there is silence. It's how you handle disagreement. It's how you react when things don't go perfectly. Every moment is either reinforcing safety or weakening it. So the real question is not, how do I create attraction? The real question is, am I creating an environment where attraction can naturally grow? Because if safety is present, attraction doesn't need to be forced. It develops on its own timeline, in its own way, without resistance, and when it does, it's not fragile. It's not dependent on performance or constant validation. It's grounded in something much deeper, trust. And trust is what allows desire to expand without fear. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Stop trying to stimulate attraction from the outside and start cultivating safety from within. Because the moment someone feels they don't have to guard themselves around you, they don't just become more open, they become more real. And desire only exists where reality is allowed to show up. Because in the end, what truly turns someone on is not how much you impress them, it's how safe they feel to be themselves in your presence. Once emotional safety is established, something very interesting begins to happen in the psychology of attraction, and that is the emergence of anticipation. Because desire is not built only in presence. In many ways, it is built even more powerfully in absence. It lives in the space between interactions, in the moments where the mind begins to wonder, to imagine, to replay. And this is where anticipation and a sense of mystery start to shape the experience. Now, when people hear the word mystery, they often misunderstand it. They think it means being distant, playing games, or withholding attention in a calculated way. But that kind of behavior creates confusion, not attraction. Real anticipation is not manipulation. It's rhythm. It's the natural ebb and flow of interaction that allows space for emotional processing. Think about how the human mind works. When everything is predictable, when every response is immediate, when every moment is filled, the brain has no reason to engage deeply. There is no tension, no curiosity, no emotional investment required. It becomes comfortable but flat. But when there is a healthy level of unpredictability, not inconsistency, but variability, the mind becomes active. It starts asking questions, it starts filling in the gaps, and in doing so, it becomes emotionally involved in the experience. That involvement is what builds desire, because desire thrives in uncertainty. Not insecurity, but the kind of uncertainty that invites curiosity. The kind that makes someone think, there's more here, I want to understand it. Now this is where balance becomes critical. Too much predictability leads to boredom. Too much unpredictability leads to anxiety. But when you find the space in between, where there is consistency in your character, but variability in your expression, you create something very powerful. You create engagement. For example, if every interaction follows the same pattern, the same tone, the same timing, the brain begins to categorize it as familiar. And while familiarity can be comforting, it rarely stimulates desire on its own. Desire needs a sense of discovery. It needs the feeling that there is still something unfolding. And that unfolding is what anticipation feeds on. This is why pauses matter. This is why you don't need to fill every silence or respond instantly to every moment. When there is space, the other person has time to reflect on the interaction. They revisit what was said, how it felt, what it meant. And in that reflection, emotional intensity often increases, not decreases, because the mind amplifies what it cannot immediately resolve. Now, here's the deeper layer. Anticipation is not just about timing, it's about emotional pacing. It's about allowing moments to breathe instead of rushing them forward. When you slow down the interaction, when you allow things to unfold naturally instead of pushing for the next step, you create depth. And depth is what makes experiences memorable. You've probably noticed this in your own life. Some interactions feel forgettable, while others stay with you long after they're over. That difference is rarely about what was said. It's about how it felt. And often, it's the space around those moments that gives them weight. The pause after a meaningful exchange. The slight delay before a response. The sense that something is building, rather than being delivered all at once. That's anticipation at work. But here is where integrity matters. Anticipation should never be confused with manipulation. The goal is not to control someone's emotions by being inconsistent or unavailable. The goal is to allow natural space for emotional processing. There is a difference between intentional pacing and artificial distance. One builds connection. The other creates confusion, so when you engage with someone, don't rush to define everything. Don't try to accelerate every moment into clarity. Let some things remain open, let curiosity exist without immediately resolving it, because curiosity is a form of attraction, and when curiosity is combined with emotional safety, which we spoke about earlier, it becomes incredibly powerful. The person feels safe enough to explore and intrigued enough to continue. That combination is what sustains desire over time. So instead of asking, how do I keep their attention? Ask a better question. Am I allowing enough space for their mind to engage? Because when someone is mentally and emotionally engaged, you are no longer carrying the interaction alone. They are participating in it internally, even when you are not present. And that is where real desire begins to take on a life of its own. Because in the end, attraction is not just about what happens when you are there, it's about what lingers when you are not, and when you understand that, you stop trying to fill every moment and start learning how to leave just enough space for something deeper to grow. Once you begin to understand emotional safety and the role of anticipation, the next layer of desire becomes impossible to ignore. And that is emotional connection, because while surface-level attraction can be immediate, it is rarely lasting. What sustains and deepens desire over time is not what someone sees, but what they feel when they are with you. And that feeling is shaped by the quality of emotional connection you create. Now, this is where many people oversimplify attraction. They reduce it to appearance, status, or charm. And while those factors can spark initial interest, they do not sustain desire. Desire, especially at a deeper level, is experiential. It is not just about how someone looks. It's about how someone makes you feel about yourself and the interaction. And emotional connection is what amplifies that feeling. When a woman feels emotionally connected, something powerful happens internally. Her perception shifts. Qualities that may have seemed neutral at first begin to feel more attractive. Presence feels stronger. Conversation feels more engaging. Even subtle traits become more meaningful. This is not illusion. It is psychological amplification. Because the brain does not evaluate attraction in isolation. It integrates emotional experience into perception. So when the emotional experience is positive, engaging, and meaningful, attraction grows in intensity. Not because anything external has changed, but because the internal experience has deepened. That is why two people can look at the same individual and feel completely different levels of attraction. One sees surface, the other feels connection. Now, what creates emotional connection? It is not just talking. It is not just sharing facts or stories. Emotional connection is built through shared meaning. It is the moment where two people are not just exchanging words, but experiencing something together. Understanding, humor, perspective, even silence. It's when a conversation moves from, what are we talking about, to what are we experiencing right now? And that shift changes everything. Because when someone feels emotionally connected, they are no longer evaluating you from the outside. They are inside the experience with you. And when someone is inside an experience, their level of engagement increases dramatically. They listen more closely. They feel more deeply. They remember more vividly. Now, here is where emotional intelligence becomes critical again. Connection is not forced, it is discovered. It happens when you pay attention to what resonates, what creates energy in the interaction, what brings out authenticity in the other person. When you notice those moments and allow them to expand, you are not creating connection artificially. You are uncovering it naturally, and that distinction matters because forced connection feels heavy. It feels like effort. But natural connection feels effortless. Even when it is deep, it feels like alignment rather than construction. This is also why presence is so important. You cannot create emotional connection if you are mentally distracted or focused on outcomes. Connection requires attention, real attention, not partial awareness. When you are fully present, you pick up on nuances. You respond more accurately. You create continuity in the conversation instead of jumping between disconnected ideas. And that continuity builds a sense of flow. Flow is what makes interactions feel alive, and when something feels alive, people are drawn to it. Not consciously, but emotionally. They want to stay in that experience. They want to understand it. They want to feel it again. That is where desire begins to deepen beyond the surface. Now, here's another important layer. Emotional connection creates investment. When someone feels connected, they begin to care about the interaction, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. And when there is investment, attention increases. When attention increases, attraction strengthens. It becomes a reinforcing cycle, but it all starts with connection. So instead of trying to impress, instead of trying to perform, shift your focus. Ask yourself, are we actually experiencing something together right now, or are we just talking? Because talking is easy. Connection is rare. And when you create that sense of shared experience, when someone feels understood, engaged, and emotionally present with you, you move beyond surface-level attraction into something far more powerful. You create meaning. And meaning is what people remember. Meaning is what people return to. Meaning is what transforms a moment into something lasting. So the goal is not to become more attractive in a superficial sense. The goal is to become someone who can create emotional depth in an interaction. Because when emotional depth is present, attraction doesn't need to be chased. It evolves on its own. And in the end, that's the truth most people overlook. People are not drawn to perfection. They are drawn to how deeply they feel when they are with you. And if you can create that feeling consistently, authentically, and without force, you don't just capture attention. You create connection that lingers long after the moment is gone. As emotional connection begins to build, another force quietly shapes whether desire strengthens or fades. And that is the energy you bring into the interaction through your sense of self. Not confidence as performance, not confidence as dominance, but confidence as emotional stability, because there is a profound difference between someone who is trying to appear confident and someone who actually feels grounded within themselves. One creates tension, the other creates trust, and people can feel that difference almost instantly. Genuine confidence is not loud, it is not forceful, it does not demand attention or validation. It is calm, steady, and self-contained. It comes from a place where you are not trying to prove your worth, you already feel it internally. And because of that, your behavior is not driven by the need to control how you are perceived. Now, why does this matter so much in attraction? Because confidence, when it is real, signals emotional security. And emotional security is deeply attractive because it reduces uncertainty. It tells the other person without words, you don't have to manage me. You don't have to guess where I stand. I am stable. But here's where most people go wrong. They confuse confidence with pressure. They think being assertive means pushing forward regardless of the other person's signals. They think certainty means eliminating all space for ambiguity. And in doing so, They unintentionally create the very thing that weakens attraction. Emotional pressure. Pressure feels like expectation. It feels like something is being asked for, even if it's not spoken directly. And the moment someone feels that expectation, their natural response is to pull back. Not because they are uninterested, but because their autonomy feels slightly threatened. And autonomy, as we've already explored, is essential for desire. So the real balance is this: confidence without pressure. It's the ability to express yourself clearly, to show interest honestly, to be present fully, without attaching your emotional state to the outcome. You are engaged but not dependent. You are open but not forcing. And that creates a very specific kind of energy, one that is both grounded and freeing at the same time. Think about the psychological impact of that. When someone is around you and they feel no pressure to respond in a certain way, no expectation to meet a standard, no subtle push toward a specific outcome, their guard lowers. They begin to relax into the interaction, and when relaxation meets emotional connection, desire has space to grow. Now, there is another layer to this that goes even deeper. Confidence without pressure creates polarity, not in the sense of opposites, but in the sense of emotional contrast. Your grounded presence becomes a stable center within the interaction, and that stability allows the other person to move freely around it. Emotionally and psychologically, they don't feel like they have to carry the interaction. They don't feel like they are being pulled or pushed. They feel like they can simply exist within it, and that feeling is rare. Because most interactions are filled with subtle agendas. People trying to impress, trying to be liked, trying to secure a response. But when you remove that agenda, when you operate from a place of internal certainty rather than external validation, your presence becomes different. It becomes clean. And clean presence is powerful because it removes confusion. There are no mixed signals, no hidden intentions, no emotional volatility, just clarity, calmness, and authenticity. Now, here's the key insight. Confidence is not what you show, it is what you don't need. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't need immediate responses. You don't need to control how the interaction unfolds. And because you don't need those things, you don't create pressure around them. And that absence of pressure is what allows the other person to feel free, free to respond, free to express, free to choose. And as we've already established, freedom is the foundation of genuine desire. So when you engage with someone, don't focus on appearing confident. Focus on becoming stable within yourself. Focus on removing the internal urgency that drives pressure. Focus on being fully present without needing to secure an outcome, because when you do that, something very powerful happens. You stop trying to create attraction, and you start embodying the conditions where attraction naturally exists. And people feel that, even if they cannot explain it, because in the end, what truly draws someone in is not intensity, not performance, not control. It is the quiet strength of someone who knows who they are, and doesn't need anything from the moment except to experience it fully. And that is what makes confidence magnetic, because it doesn't ask for attention. It earns it without trying. So the real question becomes this: are you trying to be impressive, or are you allowing yourself to be stable? Because one creates pressure, and the other creates desire. As all of these layers begin to come together, emotional safety, anticipation, connection, and grounded confidence, there is one principle that quietly determines whether everything deepens or disappears, and that is this: the human need to feel truly seen and understood. Because beneath attraction, beneath desire, beneath all the complexity of interaction, there is a very simple psychological truth. People are drawn to those who make them feel recognized at a deeper level, not observed, not analyzed, understood. And there is a difference. Being observed means someone is paying attention to what you say. Being understood means someone is connecting with what you mean. It's the difference between hearing words and feeling the emotion behind those words. Most people are used to being heard at a surface level. Conversations stay in safe territory, facts, opinions, routines. But very few people feel genuinely understood. Very few feel that someone is actually tuned into their inner world, their thoughts, their emotions, their perspective on life. And when that experience happens, it stands out immediately. Because to feel understood is to feel validated without needing to explain yourself repeatedly. It creates a sense of ease, a sense of relief. You are no longer working to be recognized, you simply are. Now, why does this matter so much in attraction? Because when a woman feels deeply understood, her emotional defenses begin to dissolve. Not because she is trying to connect, but because she no longer feels the need to protect or filter herself. She can express more freely, think more openly, and exist more authentically in the interaction. And authenticity is where real desire begins to take shape. Now, here's where emotional intelligence becomes critical again. Understanding someone is not about agreeing with everything they say. It's about accurately recognizing their experience. It's about listening in a way that captures not just the content, but the emotion, the intention, the nuance behind it. For example, instead of simply responding to the surface of what someone says, you reflect the deeper layer. You acknowledge the feeling behind it. You show that you're not just tracking the conversation, you're tracking them. And that creates depth, because when someone feels understood, they naturally begin to share more. Not because they are being asked to, but because they feel safe to. The interaction becomes less guarded, more fluid, more real. And here's the important part. This cannot be faked. People can sense when understanding is genuine and when it is performative. If you are simply repeating what they say or using techniques without real presence, it feels empty. But when your attention is real, when your curiosity is authentic, when you are actually interested in their perspective, that authenticity comes through. And that is what creates trust. Now, there is another layer to this that goes even deeper. When someone feels understood, they begin to associate that feeling with you, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Your presence becomes linked to clarity, comfort, and recognition. And over time, that association becomes powerful, because people are not just attracted to individuals, they are attracted to how those individuals make them feel consistently. If someone feels more like themselves around you, more relaxed, more understood, they will naturally gravitate toward that experience, not because they are trying to, but because it feels right. This is also why superficial attraction often fades quickly. It lacks emotional depth. It doesn't create that sense of recognition. But when someone feels seen at a deeper level, the connection becomes more meaningful, more memorable, and more lasting. Now, here's the key shift. Instead of trying to be interesting, focus on being interested, not in a surface-level way, but in a way that genuinely seeks to understand the other person's perspective, their experiences, their emotional world. Because when your attention moves from performance to curiosity, everything changes. You stop trying to impress, and you start trying to understand. And understanding creates connection far more powerfully than impression ever could. So when you're in conversation, ask yourself a simple but powerful question. Do they feel understood right now? Because if the answer is yes, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to add more, push more, or prove more. The connection is already forming. And if the answer is no, no amount of charm or effort will replace that missing foundation. Because in the end, what truly draws someone closer is not how much attention you give them, it's how accurately you understand them. And when someone feels that level of understanding, something shifts internally. They stop guarding, they stop filtering, they start opening. And that opening is where desire begins to deepen into something real. Because the truth is simple, people are not attracted to those who try the hardest. They are attracted to those who see them the clearest. As you begin to integrate everything we've explored, emotional safety, anticipation, connection, confidence, and deep understanding, you arrive at the final and most defining element of desire, and it's one that most people resist, even though it is the very thing that makes everything else work: freedom, because desire cannot exist where there is pressure. It cannot grow where there is expectation, obligation, or subtle control. It only exists where there is choice, real, unforced, emotionally safe choice. And this is where many people unintentionally sabotage attraction, not because they lack interest, but because they attach too much weight to the outcome. They want clarity too soon. They want reassurance too quickly. They want to know where they stand before the experience has had time to unfold naturally. And that urgency creates pressure. Now, pressure is not always obvious. It doesn't have to be spoken. It can exist in tone, in pacing, in the way someone responds when things don't go exactly as expected. It shows up as subtle shifts, slight impatience, over-explaining, trying to secure certainty. And the moment pressure enters the interaction, freedom disappears. When someone feels like they are expected to respond in a certain way, even gently, their natural instinct is to reclaim their autonomy. Not because they are resisting you, but because they are protecting their ability to choose. And choice is essential to desire. Because desire is not compliance. It is not something someone gives because they feel they should. It is something that emerges when they feel they want to, freely, without influence, without pressure. So the real question becomes, are you allowing that freedom? Or are you unintentionally restricting it? Now here's the deeper psychological truth. When a woman feels completely free in an interaction, free to express, free to respond, free even to disengage, something powerful happens. Instead of focusing on protecting her autonomy, she begins to explore her interest. Her energy shifts from defense to curiosity. And curiosity is where desire starts to expand. Because when there is no pressure to decide, no urgency to define, the experience becomes lighter. It becomes something to explore rather than something to resolve. And in that space, emotions have room to develop naturally. This is why the strongest attraction often builds gradually. Not because it is slow by necessity, but because it is unforced. There is no resistance, no tension, no need to protect. Just a steady unfolding of interest, shaped by genuine experience. Now, this requires a certain level of internal discipline. Because letting go of control, truly letting go, means you accept uncertainty. You accept that you cannot dictate how someone feels, when they feel it, or what they choose. And for many people, that uncertainty is uncomfortable, but here's the paradox. The more you try to remove uncertainty by controlling the interaction, the more you weaken the very thing you are trying to build, because control replaces choice. And when choice disappears, desire fades. But when you allow uncertainty to exist, when you stay present without forcing clarity, you create a different kind of experience, one where both people are engaging freely, without pressure, without expectation, and that freedom is felt immediately. It feels like ease. It feels like openness. It feels like something that is allowed to grow instead of being pushed to grow. And people are naturally drawn to that, because in a world where so many interactions carry hidden expectations, subtle pressures, and unspoken agendas, freedom stands out. It feels rare, it feels refreshing, it feels real. Now, this doesn't mean you become passive or disengaged. Freedom is not indifference. It is presence without attachment. You are still engaged. You still express interest. You still show up fully. But you do it without needing the moment to turn into something specific. You allow it to be what it is, and that is what makes it authentic, because authenticity cannot exist under pressure. It only exists where there is space to be real. So as you move forward, shift your focus. Stop asking, how do I make this work? And start asking, am I allowing this to unfold naturally? Because when something unfolds naturally, it carries its own momentum. It doesn't need to be forced, managed, or controlled. It grows because the conditions are right. And freedom is one of those conditions. So if you want to create real desire, something that is not fragile, not temporary, not dependent on constant effort, you have to master this principle. You have to become someone who allows choice, who respects autonomy, who creates space instead of pressure, because in the end, people don't move closer because they are convinced to. They move closer because they feel free to. And when someone chooses you freely, without pressure, without expectation, without influence, that is not just attraction, that is something real.